This is BioStock Studio, and today we welcome you to a presentation from Biosergen and their CEO, Tine Kold Olesen. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm going to do a presentation and I'll talk a little bit about the background, and then I'll talk a little about what we develop, and then finally what is the potential here. So if we move into the background here, then in January 2024, new numbers came out on the actual incidence of life-threatening fungal disease. So you expect that 6.5 million people is affected each year by urgent life-threatening fungal disease. And I think there are three main points that are worth mentioning. And that is that when you talk about the patient type, what kind of patient type are they? And it's who gets this disease. And it's primarily patients that already have a weakened immune system. So that's cancer patient, it's transplant patient, it's HIV patients. But it can also be patients with diabetes. Another thing that is extremely important to remember is that fungal diseases is a little bit like bacterial diseases. You form resistance against the treatment because bacteria mutates, because fungal mutates. So within the area of antifungal, there are resistance strains, and routine use of antifungal drugs in the industry and also in agriculture creates the basis for the emergence of resistant strains. The third thing I want to mention up front about the background is the high mortality rate. So this is a disease area where you have extremely high mortality rates. If you take one of the strains, aspergillosis, or one of the diseases, then aspergillosis is underdiagnosed, particularly in patients with COPD or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and lung cancer, which leads to extremely high mortality rates. So on the right side of the slides, you can actually see that approximately 2 million people get aspergillosis per year, and 75%, there's a 75% mortality. And then we have candidiasis, another major player, that's 1.5 million people that gets the life-threatening fungal disease with the origin of Candida, the fungi Candida, and approximately 40% is expected to die from that disease. So one aspect is the actual mortality, but there's also this enormous problem of resistance formation. So drug-resistant problem is a growing concern, and today there's no safe antifungal treatment with broad efficacy available. So here is some of the international press and how they write about resistance. At the bottom, you'll see Berlingske, and that's a Danish newspaper. And this is some, I think they had 4 or 5 articles during January about how the leading hospital in Denmark was infected by mold. And you had known that for several years. And these mold strains were not only common mold strains, but some of them were quite deadly. So this is a case story about Julius, and Julius was diagnosed with leukemia in 2018, and he was immediately hospitalized. Alongside the leukemia, he got infected with a life-threatening fungal infection, and you have later found out that most likely the infection was airborne mold that was growing within the hospital. And he was on a respirator. He was put on a respirator because he couldn't breathe himself. So in the hospital, he was put on a respirator, and he was there for a number of days. And the sad part is that it was not only Julius, but more evidence has shown that more children were infected. Today, his lungs do not operate at a normal capacity. He's using an inhaler on a daily basis, which means that it affects his quality of life. And I think the important thing about the story is that at Rigshospitalet you test for mold, but there are many, many, many buildings outside Rigshospitalet where you don't test for mold, and there are many places where people with a weakened immune system live, and they are at risk of getting a mold infection. So what are we developing? We're developing a novel polyene macrolide. It's a class of drug, and it's for severe invasive fungal diseases. So this particular molecule is genetically improved. That means that we have looked at the molecule, we have improved it compared to what is currently the class of drugs. We have modified it so it should be more safe. Our main competitor in this area has severe side effects, severe kidney toxicity, and therefore when you decided to do BSD-005, you wanted to modify it to be more safe. Then another key parameter is that it is killing the fungus, it's fungicidal, and that's very different to standard of care. Much standard of care, you inhibit the fungus, which means that the fungus can mutate, and when it mutates, it creates resistance. This here is fungicidal, so it kills the fungus, and therefore the formation of resistance or multi-drug resistance is limited. Another key aspect with the polyenes, if you look at the very top here, you can see the different fungal strains, Candida, Aspergillus, Fusarium, Mucor, Cryptococcus. If you look on the left side, you can see the different classes of drugs. You can see polyene macrolide, it's killing the fungus. Then you can see BSD-005 at the top, showing that it's broad-spectred. It's able to actually kill many of the fungal strain that is current. And if you look at the line below, that's amphotericin B, that's our main competitor. But the side effects of this particular drugs inhibits or limits the actual use. If you then look at other classes of drugs, then you can see that they're not broad-spectred, and at the same time they inhibit growth. So they are fungistatic, meaning that you can actually create resistance towards the treatment. And the same goes for the bottom compound, echinocandins as well. Not broad-spectred and a high risk of resistance formation. Here, this here is just one example of a mice study. It's candidiasis in immunocompromised mice. The two first lines are polyene. You can see they're the most effective drugs you can get. And the lines in the middle, that's actually standard of care, which are not as effective as a polyene macrolide. Here, this is evidence of the evidence of kidney toxicity. So the way you investigate it is that you have a biomarker called NAG, and that biomarker will represent the kidney damage. The higher NAG, the higher is the risk for kidney damage. And if you look at this here, you can see the dark blue line is our main competitor, we call it amphotericin B, and it has a high release of NAG, meaning that there's a high risk of kidney damage. If you look at the light blue line, that's BSD-005, and it's extremely low, meaning there's a very low risk of kidney toxicity. Then I want to show you some results from our phase 1 study. So we did a phase 1 in healthy volunteers. It was a classical design phase 1 study with 38 healthy males and females that were receiving either a single dose or multiple doses. There were no serious adverse events, and the adverse events we saw in the healthy volunteers were mild to moderate in severity. Most important, we focused on, is there any clinically relevant changes in those parameters that are showing any effect on the kidneys or liver. And we couldn't find any signal that we should actually have any negative effect on the kidney or liver. So we think that BSD-005 was safe in healthy subjects, and our next step moving forward is that we are going to test the compound in patients with invasive fungal infection. So these here are the timelines. We're going to start here the clinical trials, the first inpatient safety and efficacy study. We're going to test 15 patients, and then that's for 2024, our primary goal in 2024. 2025, we're going to produce material to continue our clinical development with phase 2 studies, and we hope to initiate our phase 2-3 studies starting in 2026. The 15 patients, just a few words. These 15 patients, they have, of course, invasive fungal infection, but equally important, these are kind of patients that do not tolerate standard of care, or they are resistant to first-line therapy. So you could say these patients do not have any other treatment options available for them. So we call it a rescue therapy. We have submitted the trial application, and we hope to get top-line data in Q4 2024. This here is the actual global antifungal drug market, and it's approximately $16 billion. The first line is the polyene, and they are approximately 10% of the market. The polyene is basically primarily what we call amphotericin B, and that is a drug that is used as an IV or in intensive care units, and this is the same place as we want to take BSG-005. So basically you could say we hope to take the majority of the polyene market with our intensive care unit patients. Then later on, we of course want to develop BSG-005 into other modes of treatment. It can be an oral tablet. We also have some nano formulation ongoing, and that means that with the oral and the nano formulation, then you can eat more into the market with the azoles and the echinocandins. We have in September 2023 signed a co-development and licensing agreement with Alkem. Alkem is the 5th largest pharmaceutical company in India, and it has affiliates in several countries. Alkem will fund the phase 2 and 3 clinical development in India, and they also they will fund the phase 2 and 3 that is needed to get an approval in India. And thereby we can use their data, but they are also reducing our clinical development costs substantially. We can add centers and patients outside India under the same protocol to piggyback on their studies. But to do that, and that's of course to get a marketing authorization in the rest of the world, that we are also doing a development program outside India. To be able to do that, we also need a regulatory consultation both with FDA and with EMA to discuss with them, if we have the Indian population, how many more patients do we need to take into our studies. Why India? And that's because you have access to a high number of patients with invasive fungal diseases, and that means you can run a more efficient development program in India. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that Alkem will receive exclusive commercial rights for India, but we have the rights for the rest of the world. I think this is all I want to say about our development program and where we are today.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I have some questions just to follow up. And the first thing I thought about is, like, how do you address the issue of this infection not being well known?
So I think when you are in pharmaceutical industry, all of us are dependent on basic research from governmental side, from university, etc. And I agree there has been limited research in the area. I think most of the funding goes to chronic diseases as diabetes or cancer, etc. But I think there was a shift during COVID. Suddenly you began to figure out when you have a pandemic, actually bacteria, fungi, viruses, they are equally important to figure out how do they function and how do we treat them and how do we eliminate them. So I think we have a little bit of tailwind in that area. And then I have to say the paper that came out in Lancet, the medical journal, prestigious medical journal, suddenly saying we have 6.5 million people that are at risk. And in that paper, he is a disease group that didn't have attention before was in, and that particular disease group is COPD, so chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And this is like, an enormous market to serve and a population where you have to do something. So I think for the future, we will be better off, and you'll see more investment in basic research, which helps the pharmaceutical industry to develop better drugs. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would like to discuss India a little bit, because you have a big partner there, and I mean that is a huge step for companies in your position. It is Alkem who will finance and conduct the phase 2 and 3 trials, as you mentioned, in exchange for full commercial rights in India. So then my question is, how do you plan to translate the results in different countries with other regulations, like America with the FDA and so on?
Yeah. So the agreement with Alkem is that all trials has to be done according to the guidelines that are globally known, ICH, FDA guidelines, EMA guidelines. We also agree with Alkem on the indications. So the point is we probably start with what is called aspergillosis, because there's a huge unmet medical need. You could see it was one of the first top diseases where you have high mortality and a huge number of people that are affected by aspergillosis. So we'll probably start with that. So the study will be designed so Alkem will perform it for India, but at the same time we can join with patients from the rest of the world. And thereby we can have a large pool of patients which should accommodate both FDA and EMA requirements.
And now you have the green light to conduct your first inpatient study. What is the purpose of that one?
So the purpose of this study is actually to get proof of concept. Is it correct that we are broad-spectred, that we have less side effect, that we can actually treat resistant and difficult to treat invasive fungal infection? That's our mission. It's a kind of a rescue therapy because these patients have already tried the existing therapy but failed, either because of intolerance or because of lack of effect. So if we can kind of show that we have a place in that, we can do what is called a program for rescue patients, and at the same time I think it will help us designing the next trials within different indications.
So if you don't get the results you're hoping for, what happens then?
I think there's still, then maybe we'll have to focus on one indication and see what we can do in that indications, because I know from our animal studies that we have some areas, some fungal strains where we have a unique profile. One of them is something called Aspergillus fumigatus. No other compound can today, or very few, maybe one, can actually help those patients that has Aspergillus fumigatus. There's a strain called Candida auris, which is fungal strain that there's maybe one drug that can actually kill,
combat it,
or that can act or treat that disease. But we have shown in animal data that we can actually manage that strain, and we can get a better survival rate than anyone else.
Okay, I think we should talk about you too, because you're brand new as head of Biosergen. What do you bring to the company?
Yeah, so I think from an educational point of view, I'm a PhD, so the science is okay. I also have a financial background with an MBA. I have 25 years plus experience in drug development, both with hands-on but also strategically view. And I think you need to be in a biotech, you need to be able to handle small things and have hands-on, but you also need to have the strategic perspective. On top of that, I've been Chief Operating Officer in Biosergen for the last 2.5 years. So I have come into the business of antifungals.
So you have this ongoing rights issue of 40.5 million Swedish crowns. My last question is, why should one participate?
I think it's a super offer, to be honest. But if I look at the internal factors, I think we are a clinical stage biotech. That means that we have managed the first part, which is the basic research, the animal studies, etc. So when you reach a clinical stage, then there are many uncertainties that are gone. It also means there's perhaps 5 to 6 years development time moving forward. So you would be able to see the end to development of BSD-005 successfully. And if you look at the external factors, I think the market, as we saw, is probably underestimated. And I think if I look at the value proposition for BSD in itself, that it's broad-spectred, it's killing the fungus, meaning it doesn't create the resistance that we have seen with other compounds, and then at the same time have less side effects. I think you set out to design a molecule that are covering a huge unmet medical need in the field of antifungals.
Thank you so much for coming to us today.
Thank you.